My name is Josephine Tate. I am 44 years old, and the most important thing anyone ever did for me happened on a Tuesday morning in October, inside a classroom that smelled like chalk dust and old books, and the particular warmth of a radiator that had been doing its job faithfully since 1987, when a woman I had known for exactly 11 days looked up from a paper I had written and said something that rearranged every assumption I had carried into that room about what I was allowed to become. She said, "Josephine, who told you that you weren't a writer?" I was 19 years old. I was sitting in the second row of an Introduction to Creative Writing class at a community college in Meridian, Mississippi, that I had enrolled in, not because I believed I belonged there, but because it was the only thing I could think of to do, with the $47 left after I paid first month's rent, on a room above a laundromat on Cypress Street, with the money I had saved from 8 months of waitressing at a diner called Patsy's that smelled like bacon grease, and the specific particular exhaustion of people who are on their feet from 5 in the morning until 3 in the afternoon, and who have decided, or perhaps simply accepted, that this is the shape their life has taken. I had written a 2-page story for the assignment. A woman standing at a kitchen window, the smell of rain coming through a screen that needed replacing. A daughter who had just been told something that changed everything, and who was trying to decide whether to go inside or stay outside, where the truth had not yet arrived. It was the truest thing I had ever written. It was also the kind of thing I had been writing in notebooks since I was 9 years old, and showing to no one, hiding under mattresses and inside jacket linings, and once, memorably, inside a hollowed-out dictionary I kept on a shelf in my childhood bedroom, because showing it to anyone felt like holding something fragile over a hard floor, and hoping the person you were handing it to understood what they were being given. The woman who asked me who told you that you weren't a writer was named Dr. Constance Alford. She was 61 years old. She had published 4 novels and a collection of essays, and she had been teaching at Meridian Community College for 22 years, because, as she told me once, the students who come here are not coming because everything in their life made it easy. They are coming because something in them refused to stop, even when everything else was pushing against it. That is the most interesting kind of student there is. She handed me back my 2 pages. She had written in the margin, in red ink, in the handwriting of someone who had been writing things in the margins of pages for 4 decades, "This is it. Don't let anyone talk you out of it." I have kept those 2 pages for 22 years. But I am not starting at Dr. Alford. She is where the story turns. She is not where the story begins. The story begins 11 years earlier, in a house on Beaumont Road in Meridian, Mississippi, in a kitchen where a woman named Paulette Tate stood at the stove every morning at 5:45 and made breakfast for her 3 daughters and her husband Raymond, and packed 4 lunches, and started a load of laundry, and did all of this in a silence that was not peaceful, but that had been maintained for so many years. It had become the atmosphere of the house, the thing everyone breathed without knowing it was a choice to breathe it. That woman was my mother, and what she did, and what she endured, and what she kept from me for 20 years, to protect something I had not yet earned the right to protect myself, is the reason I am sitting at this desk at 44 years old, telling you this story, instead of standing at a window in Meridian, Mississippi, watching someone else's rain come through a screen that needs replacing. Before I go any further, please like this video and subscribe to Silent Will Stories. Drop your city and the time where you are in the comments tonight. I need to know who is here for this one, because this one is the most personal thing I have ever put into words, and I need to know it is landing somewhere real. Now let me take you back to Beaumont Road, to the kitchen, to the silence, to the morning everything changed. Raymond Tate was not a violent man. I want to say this clearly, because what I am about to describe is a specific kind of damage that does not leave marks on the body, and is therefore invisible in ways that physical damage is not. And I have found over the years that when I describe my father, people sometimes wait for the violence, as if it is the only way to validate what I am telling them. There was no violence. There was something else. Something that operates in the space between what a person does and what a person says, in the gap between the version of a family that exists in public and the one that exists at 5:45 in the morning when no one outside the house can see it. Raymond Tate believed in two things with the complete and unexaminable certainty of someone who had never been required to examine them. He believed in practicality, and he believed in his own authority within his household. Practicality meant that anything which could not be exchanged for something measurable was not worth the time it took. Dreams were not practical. Art was not practical. Writing, specifically, was the least practical thing he could imagine, and he said so with the bored certainty of a man who has never encountered a piece of writing that moved him, and has concluded from this that moving people is not something writing does. His authority meant that his opinions on these matters were not opinions. They were the structure of the house, the walls and the ceiling, the thing that everything else was built inside of. My mother had been a reader all her life, not quietly and privately, the way people read when they are afraid of being seen doing it. Openly, and with the specific joy of someone for whom a book is not an escape from life, but an expansion of it. She read at the kitchen table. She read in the car waiting to pick us up from school. She read in the evenings when Raymond was watching television and the children were in bed, curled in the corner of the couch under a lamp that was just bright enough, and that Raymond occasionally turned off without comment when he walked past. She never said anything about the lamp being turned off. She turned it back on after he passed, and kept reading. She had wanted to be a teacher. She had taken 2 years of college before Raymond, which meant before the marriage and the first child, and the second child, and the third, and the house on Beaumont Road, and the 5:45 mornings, and the silence that was not peaceful. She had read to us every night, from the time we were old enough to be read to. Not picture books only, real books. She had read us Charlotte's Web, and Harriet the Spy, and A Wrinkle in Time, and Tuck Everlasting, and she had read them with the full investment of someone who believed the books were important, and that the act of reading them to us was important, and that we were capable of understanding things that were more complex than our ages would suggest. My 2 sisters, Alma and Darlene, received these readings with the polite attention of people who appreciate a thing without being altered by it. They liked the stories. They moved on. I lay awake after every reading and kept the story going in my head, took the characters further, added rooms to the houses, invented what happened in the gaps between the chapters. By the time I was 9, I was writing these extensions down in a notebook with a blue cover that I kept hidden because I understood, without being told, that writing was not a practical thing, and that in our house, the impractical things were not discussed. I understood this without being told, because I had watched my mother turn the lamp back on after Raymond walked past, quietly and without drama, and I had understood from that small motion everything I needed to understand about what happened to the things that mattered to you in that house. You protected them. You did not display them. You kept them safe the only way you could, which was by not requiring them to survive direct contact with the thing that would diminish them. I was 9 years old, and I understood this. I wrote in the blue notebook, and I hid it, and I told no one. The morning everything changed was a Tuesday in March. I was 8 years old. I am starting there rather than at 9, because the blue notebook came from that Tuesday morning, and that Tuesday morning came from what my mother did, and what my mother did is the reason I am writing at all. I had been sick for 3 days. A bad cold, the kind that settles into the chest and makes everything feel padded and distant. I was home from school. My sisters had gone. Raymond had gone to work. My mother and I were alone in the house for the first time I could remember, just the two of us, with the particular quality of a weekday morning in a house that is normally full and is suddenly not. My mother made me tea with honey. She brought it to the table where I was sitting in my pajamas, and she sat across from me with her own cup, and she looked at me for a long moment with the expression I can only describe now, as an adult, as the expression of someone deciding to say something true. She said, "What do you think about, Josie, when you're quiet?" No one had ever asked me that. I said, "Stories." She said, "What kind of stories?" I said, "The kind where things happen to people, and the people have to figure out what to do." She was quiet for a moment. She said, "Do you write them down?" I looked at her. She said, "It's all right if you do. I won't tell anyone." I said, "Why not?" She said, "Because some things need to be kept safe until they're ready. A story is like a plant. You don't put it outside before it can stand the weather." I looked at my tea. Then I said, "I have a notebook." She said, "I know." I looked up. She smiled, the specific smile of a woman who has known something for a while and is glad to be able to finally say so. She said, "I found it once when I was changing your bedding. I didn't read it. I put it back exactly where it was. But I want you to know I know it's there." I said, "Are you going to tell Daddy?" She was quiet for a moment, a specific quiet. She said, "No, I'm not." She said it with a finality that I understood, at 8 years old, was not simply a decision about the notebook. It was a declaration about what she was going to protect, and from what, and for how long. She reached across the table and put her hand over mine. She said, "You keep writing, Josie. You hear me? Whatever happens in this house, whatever anyone says or doesn't say, you keep writing. In the notebook, in your head, wherever you can, you keep writing." I said, "Why?" She said, "Because it's yours, and nobody can take what's yours if you keep it close enough." I was 8 years old. I kept writing. I kept it close enough. For 36 years, that is what I have done. Let me tell you what our house on Beaumont Road was like, because the house matters. The specific quality of it matters. The way a childhood home shapes the person you become, even when, especially when, the shaping is not what anyone would have chosen. The house was a 3-bedroom brick on a street of similar houses. It was always clean. My mother made sure of that, not because she had any particular passion for cleanliness, but because a clean house was one fewer thing that Raymond could direct his attention toward, and fewer targets meant fewer redirections. Raymond was an accountant at a firm downtown. He was good at his job, and he was pleasant at parties, and people who knew him in those contexts would have described him as a reasonable man. He was the kind of man who was very good in situations with clear rules, and very difficult in situations that did not have them. And family life, which has no clear rules, was where the difficulty lived. He had opinions about everything, and the opinions were stated as facts, and the facts were not discussable. This was not dramatic. It was not loud, mostly. It was the steady application of a particular kind of certainty that, over years, teaches the people around it to stop offering anything that might be evaluated and found insufficient. My mother had stopped offering most things by the time I was old enough to notice. She had narrowed the life she lived in front of Raymond to the things he could not object to, and had moved everything else into the spaces he could not see. The lamp that she turned back on, the library books that she returned before he could ask what she was reading, the conversations she had with us about what mattered that happened when he was not in the house. She was not a weak woman. I want to be absolutely clear about this, because the picture I have drawn could be mistaken for that, and it would be wrong. She was a woman who had assessed her situation with clear eyes and made the decisions available to her, which were not the decisions available to someone in a different situation. And she had made them with the specific intelligence of a person who understands that survival and dignity are not always achieved through direct confrontation. She survived with dignity for 22 years. And in those 22 years, she did something for me that I did not understand until I was 32 years old. She kept the belief alive, not loudly, not with speeches or demonstrations or anything that Raymond could see and redirect. She kept it alive the way you keep a fire alive in difficult weather, by shielding it from the wind with your own body, by feeding it just enough, and at the right moments, by never letting it go out, even when that required the kind of vigilance that no one who isn't doing it can fully imagine. She kept the belief that I was a writer alive inside our house on Beaumont Road for the entire time we lived there. She did it by finding my discarded pages in the trash and putting them in an envelope she kept in her closet. She did it by checking out library books on writing and leaving them on my bed with small pieces of paper marking certain passages. The pieces of paper blank, but the markings intentional. Her way of saying, "I read this, and I thought of you." She did it by asking me, when we were alone, what I was working on. Not what are you studying, not what are your grades. What are you working on? She did it by being the one person in the house who, when I came home from school with a story published in the school literary magazine, a tiny thing, the school literary magazine, 12 pages stapled together, 100 copies printed on the school's aging printer. She held it like it was the New Yorker, and she read every word, and she said, "Josie, this is something." Raymond saw it on the kitchen counter and said, "Is this the kind of thing you're spending your time on?" My mother said, "She got published." He said, "In the school paper." She said, "In the literary magazine." He said, "It's the same thing." She said, "It isn't." It was one of the only times I ever heard her push back on a direct statement of his. She said it quietly and without drama, and she did not say anything further, and neither did he. And the magazine went back on the counter, And that night after dinner, she took it and put it somewhere I did not know about, and I did not ask. 20 years later, when I was clearing out her house, I found it, in the envelope in the closet, with everything else she had kept. I need to tell you about my sisters before I tell you what happened when I was 29, and everything between our parents finally reached the surface. Alma is 3 years older than me. She is the oldest, and she has always carried the weight of that, with the specific combination of competence and exhaustion that first children carry in difficult households. She works in hospital administration in Jackson. She is organized and capable, and she has spent most of her adult life making sure the external structures of her existence are so solid and well-maintained that nothing inside can unsettle them. Darlene is between us. She is 2 years older than me, and 18 months younger than Alma, and she has always occupied the middle with the particular ease of someone who has figured out that the middle is actually the safest place in a difficult field. She is an accountant like Raymond, which caused him visible satisfaction when she chose the career, and which Darlene has never seemed to mind. Neither of my sisters are readers. Neither of them write. Neither of them have ever looked at me with the expression my mother wore when she held the literary magazine and said, "This is something." They love me. I want to be clear about that. We are sisters, and we love each other in the complicated way of people who grew up in the same difficult place and have emerged from it with different coping mechanisms and different relationships to what happened there. But they did not see what my mother and I had, not because they were not paying attention, because it was not visible to anyone who was not inside it. The thing between my mother and me, the thing she built from library books placed on pillows and pages, rescued from the trash, and a Tuesday morning over tea, when she said, "What do you think about when you're quiet?" and then listened to the answer. That thing was invisible to everyone but us, which means that when everything came apart, when Raymond finally did the thing that had been building for 22 years, my sisters experienced it from the outside, and I experienced it from inside the thing my mother had built for me, which turned out to be the only shelter available. My father left the house on Beaumont Road on a Thursday evening in November. I was 29. My mother called me in Portland, where I had been living for 4 years, at 8:15 that night. She said, "Josie, your father has moved out." I said, "Mama, are you all right?" She said, "I am better than all right. I want you to know that first." I said, "What happened?" She was quiet for a moment. She said, "I told him something true, and he couldn't live with it." I said, "What did you tell him?" She said, "I told him that I had been happy in this marriage for approximately 3 years, and that was 22 years ago, and that the remaining 19 had been a very long time to spend not being happy." I sat down on my apartment floor. She said, "He told me I was being dramatic." I said, "Mama." She said, "I told him that dramatic was his word for any feeling he hadn't approved in advance, and that I had decided to stop using his vocabulary." I said, "Mama." She said, "He left. He took his suits and his accounting books and the television from the bedroom, and he left. I am sitting in the living room without a bedroom television, and I want you to know that I feel completely fine about that." I was crying. I want to be honest about that. Not from sadness about my father leaving, from the specific overwhelming feeling of hearing my mother, 29 years after the Tuesday morning over tea, 22 years after she started keeping my pages in an envelope in her closet, 20 years after she turned the lamp back on after Raymond walked past. Finally, say out loud the thing she had been living inside for longer than I had been alive. She said, "Josie." "Are you there?" I said, "I'm here, Mama." She said, "I want to tell you something." I said, "Okay." She said, "When you were 8 years old, and you were homesick, and we sat at the kitchen table, I asked you what you thought about when you were quiet. Do you remember?" I said, "I remember." She said, "I had been waiting for 3 years to ask you that question. Since you were 5, and I could see something in you that I recognized. I kept waiting for the right moment, and that morning, I thought if I wait for a right moment that feels right to Raymond, I will wait forever." I pressed my hand flat on my apartment floor. She said, "I want you to know that every decision I made in that house from that Tuesday morning forward was made with you in mind. The library books, the magazine, the pages in the envelope, all of it." I said, "I know, Mama." She said, "I don't think you know the full of it yet. I think you'll know it when you're older." "I think there are things I did that you'll understand in stages." I said, "What things?" She was quiet. She said, "The envelope is in the closet, in the house. If something ever happens to me, I need you to find it." I said, "I'll find it." She said, "Good." Then she said, "Tell me what you're working on." I told her. For 40 minutes, sitting on my apartment floor with tears drying on my face, I told my mother what I was working on. A novel, the first one, which I had been circling for 2 years and had finally begun to enter. A woman, a house in the South, a daughter who had been told something true and was trying to decide whether to go inside or stay outside, where the truth had not yet arrived. She listened the way she had always listened, with the full attention of someone who believes the thing being said is worth the full attention. She said, "How long have you been working on this?" I said, 2 years of circling and 3 weeks of actually writing." She said, "And?" I said, "It's the best thing I've ever written, Mama." She said, "I know." I said, "You can't know. You haven't read it." She said, "Josie, I've known you were writing it since you were 8 years old, sitting at this kitchen table. I've been waiting 21 years for you to actually start. Let me tell you about the novel, not the contents of it, the journey of it. I finished the first draft in 14 months. I was 31 years old. I was still in Portland, working as a grant writer by day, and writing from 5 to 7 every morning before the workday started, because 5 to 7 was the time that belonged to me, and I had learned, from my mother, that the things that belong to you require you to protect them specifically and deliberately, or they get absorbed into the things that don't. I sent the first draft to Dr. Constance Alford. I had stayed in touch with her since the introduction to creative writing class 12 years before. Not constantly. The way you stay in touch with the people who said the thing you needed to hear, at the moment you needed to hear it, with the specific care of someone who understands that certain relationships require tending even across distance and years. She called me 2 weeks after I sent the draft. She said, "Josephine." I said, "Tell me." She said, "You finished it." I said, "First draft." She said, "You finished it. After everything." I knew what after everything meant. She knew the full story. Had known it in pieces over 12 years of letters and calls, the house on Beaumont Road, and Raymond and the lamp, and the pages in the trash, and the Tuesday morning, and the 22 years, and the Thursday night phone call. She said, "It's not quite there yet. "You know that," I said. "I know," she said. "But the bones are extraordinary. The bones are what can't be taught. Everything else can be taught." She spent an hour on the phone with me talking through the revisions. Not prescriptively. The way Dr. Alford always worked, which was by asking questions that helped you understand what you were trying to do, and then asking whether you'd done it. She said before we hung up, "Josephine, who was the first person to tell you that you were a writer?" I said, "You were." She said, "No, I was the first person outside your house to say it out loud." "Someone said it to you before I did." I thought about it. She said, "The person who kept those pages in an envelope. That is the person who told you first." I said, "She didn't say it in words." Dr. Alford said, "Baby, sometimes the loudest things never get said in words." I need to tell you now about the thing I found when I cleared out my mother's house. She died at 67. I am aware that this is young, younger than it should have been. The illness came in her 4th year of living alone in the house on Beaumont Road, the 4 years after Raymond had taken his suits and his accounting books and the bedroom television, the 4 years that were the happiest I had seen her in my life. She had been happy in the way that people are happy when they have finally been given permission to take up the space they were always meant to occupy. She had gone back to college at 62, not a degree program, just courses, because there were things she wanted to learn, and time, finally, to learn them. She had joined a book club. She had started writing herself, not fiction, a journal, which she kept in a notebook not entirely unlike the blue one she had given me the silent permission to use when I was 9. She had read my first novel when it was published. She had held the finished book the way she had held the literary magazine when I was 14, with both hands, reading every word. Her expression, the specific expression of someone who has waited a long time for something and is receiving it exactly as they imagined. She had said, "Josie, this is something." The same words. 23 years later, the same words. She died on a Wednesday morning in April, and I drove from Portland to Meridian in 2 days, because I needed the drive. I needed the specific progress of covering ground, the physical movement through the space between where I was and where she was, because the alternative was to arrive too fast and too suddenly in a world that no longer had her in it. Alma and Darlene had already arrived by the time I got there. We moved through the house together, the 3 of us, in the specific quiet of women doing necessary work, in a space that is both familiar and suddenly foreign, because the person who made it what it was is not in it. On the 3rd day, I went to the closet. The envelope was there. It was larger than I had expected. Not a standard envelope, a document envelope, the flat cardboard kind that holds papers without folding them. It was labeled in my mother's handwriting in the blue marker she used for things she considered important. It said, "For Josie, open when you're ready." I took it to the kitchen table. I sat down in the chair where I had sat at 8 years old on a Tuesday morning, with a cup of tea and a cold and the specific lonely clarity of a sick child in an empty house. I opened the envelope. Inside was everything. The 2 pages I had written for Dr. Alford's class. The ones with the margin note in red. "This is it. Don't let anyone talk you out of it." 7 pages from the blue notebook. The earliest things I had written, age 9, the handwriting of a child pressing hard enough to leave marks in the page beneath. Stories about women at windows, daughters deciding things, rain coming through screens that needed replacing. The literary magazine from 8th grade, still stapled. My story on page 7. 4 letters I had sent her from Portland over 12 years. The ones where I described what I was working on, and why it mattered, and what I was afraid of, and what I hoped for. A printout of the acknowledgments page from my first novel. I had written, in the acknowledgments, to my mother, Paulette Tate, who kept the pages when I threw them away, and the light on when it was turned off. Every word in this book started in your kitchen. She had printed it and kept it with everything else. And at the bottom of the envelope, a single sheet of paper, folded in thirds. Her handwriting, blue ink. The handwriting that had gotten slightly larger in the last years. It was a letter, undated, which meant she had been writing it for some time, and had not decided when to finish. It began, "Josie, you were 8 years old, and I asked you what you thought about when you were quiet, and you said stories, and I thought my heart would come out of my body. I had been waiting for that moment for 3 years, since you were 5, and I could see it in the way you looked at the world, the way you looked at everything twice, the first time to see it, and the second time to understand it. Not everyone looks twice. The ones who do are the ones who write. I want to tell you something I have never said out loud, because saying it out loud in that house would have been like putting a plant outside before it could stand the weather. I believe you are the best writer I have ever read. I have read a great many books. You know this. You have watched me read my whole life. I am not saying this because you are my daughter. I am saying it because I read your first novel 4 times, and each time I found something I had missed. And each time, what I found was something that only a person who looks twice at everything could have put there. I kept your pages because I needed to. Not for you. For me. Because there were days in that house when the things I loved were made small, and the pages were proof that smallness is not the same as truth. Your pages were the proof that what I believed about you was true, even on the days when Raymond's certainty was the loudest thing in the room. I am sorry it took me so long to leave. I am not sorry about the time before I left, because in that time, I gave you everything I had that mattered. The belief, the permission, the Tuesday morning. The lamp turned back on. Those things were mine to give, and I gave them. And if I had left earlier, I might have given them differently, and I cannot be certain the different would have been better. What I know is this. You kept writing. Through everything in that house, and everything that house required of you to survive, and everything you had to build in Portland with your own hands on your own terms, you kept writing. That is not something I taught you. That was always yours. I only showed you that it was allowed. There is one more thing in this envelope, at the very bottom. It is small, and it does not look like much, but I want you to know what it is. It is the first page of the very first story you ever wrote. You were 5 years old. You brought it to me in the kitchen, and you said, "Mama, I wrote something," and I read it, and I kept it. I have had it for 39 years. I have never shown it to anyone. I am leaving it for you because you should have it, because it is the beginning of everything, because when you hold it, I want you to understand that the beginning was always inside you, and I only ever stood at the door. The best thing I ever did was not leave that door open. The best thing I ever did was stand in front of it. I love you, Josie. Keep going. Your mama. I want to stop here. I have been writing and speaking and telling stories for 22 years, and I have never once had to stop in the middle. I am stopping, for the length of a breath, because my mother stood in front of a door in a house on Beaumont Road in Meridian, Mississippi for 22 years, and she kept that door open with her body, and I walked through it and built my life on the other side, and I have never fully understood until I read that letter exactly what the standing cost her. And I want you to understand it before I go further, because this story is not about Raymond and what he limited. It is not about Dr. Alford and what she saw. It is not even ultimately about the novel or the writing or the 22 years of doing the thing my mother told me not to stop doing. This story is about my mother, about what a woman does with a fire when the weather is bad, about what keeping a belief alive actually looks like from the inside, about the specific invisible heroism of a person who says, "You keep writing, Josie," in a kitchen in Mississippi in 1987, and means it for the rest of her life, without ever saying it again, because she doesn't have to, because she has already said it completely, because some sentences are whole and do not require addition. This is for you, Mama. All of it. This was always for you. If you are here watching this, and you have someone who stood in front of a door for you, please drop their name in the comments. Just their name. No explanation required. And if you have never been told to keep going by someone who meant it with everything they had, I am telling you now, keep going. With whatever it is that is yours, the thing you write in the blue notebook and hide under the mattress, the thing you do at 5 a.m. before the workday starts, the thing that belongs to you and that the world has not yet given you permission to claim. You do not need the world's permission. You needed someone to say so. Consider it said. Subscribe to Silent Will Stories if you haven't yet. Stay. The table is always warm. Now let me finish the story, because there is a last part, and the last part matters. I found the first page at the very bottom of the envelope. She was right. It did not look like much. A half sheet of lined paper, the kind from an elementary school composition pad, torn carefully along the top edge, where it had been taken from the spiral. The handwriting of a 5-year-old, which is to say the handwriting of someone who has learned that letters exist, but has not yet fully determined how they work together, or whether they are required to stay inside the lines. The story was 4 sentences. I am going to read them to you. There was a woman. She looked out the window every morning. She was waiting for something. She did not know what, but she kept looking. 4 sentences. A 5-year-old who would spend the next 39 years writing variations of that woman. That window. That waiting. That keeping looking, which is another name for hope and also for attention, and also for the specific discipline of a person who has decided that the thing outside the window is worth the looking, even before they know what it is. I sat at the kitchen table on Beaumont Road with that half page of lined paper in my hands. Alma came in from the hallway and saw my face. She said, "Josie, what is it?" I showed her. She read the 4 sentences. She sat down. She said, "How old were you?" I said, 5. She said, "And she kept this." I said, "For 39 years. Alma is not a woman who cries easily. She has spent most of her adult life in environments that require composure, and she has developed the specific capability of someone who has had to." She looked at the half page of lined paper with the elementary school handwriting, and she pressed her lips together. She said, "I didn't know." I said, "I know you didn't." she said. About any of it. The pages in the closet, the library books. I didn't know she was doing all of that. I said, she kept it quiet. She had to. Alma said, she was protecting you. I said, she was keeping the belief alive. She told me once that some things need to be kept safe until they're ready. A story is like a plant. You don't put it outside before it can stand the weather. Alma looked at me. She said that to you. I said, when I was 8. Alma was quiet for a long time. Then she said something I was not expecting. Something that cracked open a part of the story I had not known was sealed. She said, she did things for me too, quietly, that I didn't recognize until just now. I looked at her. She said, I wanted to be a doctor. When I was 12, I told her, and she didn't say it wasn't practical. She drove me to the library and checked out every book on biology she could find and left them on my bed. I read them all. I didn't become a doctor, but she never told me I couldn't. Darlene had come in from the living room. She was standing in the doorway. She said, she taught me to drive before Raymond said it was time. She said a woman should know how to get herself where she needs to go before anyone decides she's ready. We sat at the kitchen table, the 3 of us, in the kitchen that smelled like everything a family kitchen accumulates over decades. The 3 daughters of Paulette Tate, who had built a life in a difficult house and had kept 3 fires going in the difficult weather, and had not said a word about any of it, because saying a word would have put the fires at risk, and some things you protect by not naming them. We sat there for a long time. Nobody said anything for a while. Then Alma said, she should have had more. She meant more than what the house on Beaumont Road had given her, more than the lamp turned back on in secret, more than the 4 years of college courses and the book club and the journal she had started keeping when Raymond took his suits and left. More than 67 years in a life that had contained more difficulty than joy until the very end. I said, she had us. Alma said, we weren't enough. I said, no, we weren't. But we were what she had, and she made us everything she could with what she had. That's what she did. That's what she was. Darlene said quietly, I want to go to her room. We went together, the 3 of us, to the room that had been hers alone for 4 years, the room without the bedroom television that Raymond had taken, the room that she had remade in those 4 years into something that looked like her. Books on every surface, a journal on the nightstand, a reading lamp that was just bright enough and that she was not required to turn off for anyone. On the nightstand, beside the journal, a photograph. 3 women, daughters. Behind us, in the photo, a bookshelf. On the second shelf, visible if you knew to look, the spine of my first novel. She had placed it there herself, at eye level, where she would see it every morning. I want to tell you where things are now. I am 44 years old. I live in Portland, Oregon, in an apartment with a window that faces east and receives the morning light at the specific angle that makes writing possible, which I have come to understand is not about the light, but about what the light means to me, which is the beginning of the day before anything else has claimed it. I am working on my 3rd novel. The 2nd was published 2 years ago and was dedicated to Paulette Tate. The dedication said, for the woman who stood in front of the door. Every word began with you. Dr. Constance Alford is 83 years old. She called me when the 2nd novel was published and said, Josephine, remember what I wrote in the margin of your first story? I said, I remember. She said, "You didn't let anyone talk you out of it." I said, "Someone made sure I wouldn't." She said, "I know. I've always known. You write like someone who was believed in from the beginning. There's a specific quality to that kind of writing. It's not confidence exactly. It's something quieter. A certainty about the right of the thing to exist. Some writers never have that. You've had it since you were 19, and I always knew it didn't come from the world. It came from somewhere closer." I said, "It came from a kitchen table in Mississippi." She said, "Yes, that's where those things come from. My sisters and I speak every week. Things between us are different, since our mother's kitchen table, the morning we all sat together and understood, each of us with our own version of the same truth, what she had been doing while we were growing up inside her. Alma says sometimes that she wishes she had known. I tell her what I believe, which is that knowing would have changed it. The secrecy was the shelter. The hidden thing stays alive because it is hidden. My mother understood that, and she chose accordingly. And the choosing was its own kind of wisdom that I am still learning to fully respect. Raymond is alive. He is 71. He lives in a townhouse in Jackson. We are not estranged, and we are not close. We occupy the specific middle territory of people who share blood and history, and a complicated love that does not require frequent contact to remain true. He has never read my books. I have never asked him to. The accounting books still line his shelves, I am told, and he is still very good at things that can be measured. The blue notebook is in my desk drawer, not the original. That was one of the things I did not find in the closet. But I have had a blue notebook in my desk drawer since I was 9 years old, and I have not been without one in 35 years. They go with me everywhere, to readings and conferences and residencies, and the coffee shop on Division Street in Portland, where I write on Tuesday mornings, because Tuesday mornings have always been the mornings where something important became available. The half page with the 4 sentences is in a frame on my desk. There was a woman. She looked out the window every morning. She was waiting for something. She did not know what, but she kept looking. Every morning, I sit down at my desk and I look at those 4 sentences before I write anything else. Not for inspiration, for orientation, for the reminder of where everything started and what it looked like before I knew what it was, and who was watching me write it, and what she was doing with what she saw. My mother saw me. That is the whole of it. She saw me at 5 years old, with a half page of lined paper, and she understood what she was looking at, and she spent the next 39 years making sure I had the conditions to become it. She did not ask for acknowledgement. She did not ask for gratitude or recognition, or even understanding. She asked for nothing except that I keep going, and she asked that only once. On a Tuesday morning at a kitchen table when I was 8 years old, and she had run out of the patience for waiting for the right moment, and had simply said the thing that needed saying. "You keep writing, Josie. Whatever happens in this house, whatever anyone says or doesn't say, you keep writing. I have kept writing. I will keep writing. Every morning when I sit at this desk and look at the 4 sentences of a 5-year-old who did not know what she was beginning, I am keeping a promise I did not know I had made to a woman who kept every page. That is enough. That is everything. I want to leave you with one thing. Somewhere in your life, There is a person who has been doing for you what my mother did for me. Quietly, without announcement, without requiring you to understand it while they are doing it. Keeping a fire alive in difficult weather with their body between it and the wind. Maybe you know who it is. Maybe you have always known. Maybe you are about to know, in the way that the story of someone else's life sometimes illuminates the corner of your own life that you have not fully looked at. If you know, go tell them. Not tomorrow, not when you have the right words, because the right words are a reason for postponement, and postponement is the enemy of every true thing. Go tell them imperfectly and immediately, and with whatever words are available to you right now, because my mother knew I believed in her work. I told her in the acknowledgments of a novel, and she printed the acknowledgments page and kept it in the envelope with everything else, and she died knowing. But I wish I had said it to her face more times than I did. I wish I had sat across from her at the kitchen table, the way she sat across from me at 8 years old, and asked what I thought about when I was quiet, and told her what I thought about when I was quiet, which was her, which was always also her. Tell the person who stood in front of the door. Tell them today, before the envelope is what's left, and if there is a door you need to stand in front of for someone you love, stand in it, even if it costs you, even if no one sees you doing it, even if the person on the other side is too young to understand what you are giving them, and will not understand it until they are clearing out your house 30 years later and find a document envelope in a closet. Stand in front of the door. The plant will be ready for the weather one day. You just have to keep the door open until it is. She saw me at 5 years old, with half a page of something, and she spent the next 39 years making sure I had the conditions to become it. She did not ask for anything except that I keep going. Keep going. With whatever is yours. That is the whole instruction. That is the whole thing.